People don't turn you into a villain because you're dangerous. They do it because you stopped being useful to their illusion. And here's the part no one warns you about. The moment you stop sacrificing yourself for people, they call you selfish. The moment you stop carrying weight that was never yours, the moment you say no instead of quietly absorbing the hit, the moment you protect your peace instead of protecting their comfort, you become the problem. You become the threat. You become the villain in the story they need to keep themselves innocent. Not because you changed, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself to keep everyone else comfortable. And the people who relied on your silence will always resent the sound of you choosing yourself. You were always the one who held everything together. Even when you were falling apart inside, you didn't show it. You couldn't, because everyone around you relied on the version of you that never crumbled. You learned early that your feelings had to wait, that your needs were negotiable, that other people's comfort mattered more than your own breathing room. So you became the calm one, the responsible one, the strong one, not because you felt strong, but because no one else wanted to be. You became the peacekeeper, the caretaker, the emotional buffer between everyone else and their own consequences. You noticed the tension before anyone said a word. You diffused arguments before they erupted. You walked on eggshells so others could stomp freely. You were the one who sensed the mood shift in the room the moment you walked in, the one who automatically adjusted yourself so no one else would get uncomfortable. You didn't choose this role, you were trained into it. When someone was angry, you made yourself small. When someone was sad, you made yourself responsible. When someone was disappointed, you made it your job to fix it. You absorbed chaos before it could hit them. You softened your tone. You swallowed your reactions. You ignored your instincts. Because that's what you had to do to keep the peace. And for a while it worked. People liked you that way. Quiet, predictable, self-sacrificing. The kind of person who gives more than they receive. The kind of person who listens more than they speak. The kind of person who doesn't ask for anything because they've learned it won't be given anyway. Your childhood taught you that love had conditions. Your relationships taught you that acceptance required compliance. Your environment taught you that your pain was an inconvenience. So you adapted. You became the one who doesn't need anything. The one who always copes. The one who always adjusts. You made yourself small so the room could stay calm. You silenced your truth so someone else's ego wouldn't explode. You held the family together while everyone else pulled it apart. You carried a weight that was twice your size and acted like it was nothing. You were the glue, and somehow, after all of that, you still ended up being the problem. Not the one who yelled, not the one who lied, not the one who manipulated, controlled, or dominated the room. No, you, the one who tried to keep the peace. The moment you needed something, you were too much. The moment you disagreed, you were difficult. The moment you drew a boundary, you were selfish. The moment you finally said, "I can't keep doing this," they acted like you betrayed them. Because people who get used to your self-abandonment call it attitude when you start choosing yourself. They called you ungrateful. They called you dramatic. They called you the villain because you stopped playing the role they assigned you. And the part that cuts the deepest, you weren't trying to start a war. You weren't trying to rebel. You weren't trying to flip the script. You were just tired. Tired of carrying everything. Tired of pretending you were okay. Tired of being everyone's emotional foundation while yours was cracking. When you stopped over-functioning, the entire system shifted. And instead of asking, "Are you okay?" they asked, "What's wrong with you?" Instead of support, they gave you suspicion. Instead of compassion, they gave you blame. Instead of relief that you were finally speaking up, they punished you for it. Because people who depend on your silence will always resent your voice. And when you tried to explain what you were feeling, the exhaustion, the overwhelm, the hidden pain, they dismissed it. They minimized it. They twisted it. They acted like you were imagining things or overreacting or being dramatic. And every time they did that, you shrank a little more. You learned to doubt yourself. You learned to question your own reality. You learned to ignore your own intuition because theirs always overpowered yours. You convinced yourself that you were the one who needed to change, that you were the one who needed to stop being sensitive, that you were the one who needed to be more understanding. But deep down, you felt the ache of being unseen, the ache of being taken for granted, the ache of being blamed for finally collapsing under a weight you were never meant to carry alone. You weren't the problem. You were the one who tried the hardest. And the more you tried to be good, the more invisible you became. Because nothing is more painful than being misunderstood when all you ever wanted was peace. Here's the part no one warns you about. The moment you stop sacrificing yourself for people, you don't just change the dynamic, you threaten the entire system that depended on your silence. Because people who rely on your self-sacrifice fear your independence more than your absence. Your independence means they lose their emotional shield, their comfort, their control, the predictable version of you who made their dysfunction feel manageable. To them, your self-neglect wasn't a tragedy. It was convenient. As long as you kept giving, they never had to look at what they were taking. As long as you kept absorbing, they never had to face what they were avoiding. Your suffering kept the family system running. Your compliance kept the peace. Your silence kept the truth contained. So when you began to reclaim yourself, even quietly, even gently, they didn't see it as healing. They saw it as betrayal. Because narcissistic people interpret boundaries as personal attacks. Normal people hear no, and they adjust. Narcissists hear no, and they panic. They don't see your limits as limits. They see them as insubordination, disobedience, rebellion. To them, you're not setting boundaries. You're breaking the unspoken contract that you would always carry what they refused to face. This is why in dysfunctional families, the one who wakes up is always cast as the villain. Not because they're harmful, but because they refuse to continue the family's denial. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You became dangerous the moment you decided to stop abandoning yourself, because you disrupted the roles everyone depended on. And nothing terrifies a dysfunctional system more than role collapse. Role collapse is when you stop playing the part you were assigned without your consent, the caretaker, the quiet one, the fixer, the forgiver, the one who never complains, the one who always understands. When you woke up, their entire illusion cracked. Your healing disrupted the narrative. Your clarity exposed the confusion. Your self-respect punctured their entitlement. You didn't attack anyone. You just withdrew from a part you never agreed to play. But to people who benefit from the old script, your growth feels like a threat, because for the first time, they cannot predict you, they cannot guilt you, they cannot control you, using the same emotional levers they always pulled. They lose their emotional servant, their scapegoat, their buffer, their supply. And when someone loses control, they don't usually admit it. They project it. They project their guilt onto the one who dared to say, "Enough." They project their shame onto the one who finally said, "I deserve better." They project their insecurity onto the one whose strength exposes their weakness. They label you selfish, not because you took too much, but because you stopped giving them what they never should have taken. They call you difficult, not because you are, but because they can no longer manipulate you. They call you disloyal, not because you betrayed them, but because your clarity reveals how deeply they betrayed you. And here's the darkest truth. You were never the villain. You were the mirror. You reflected back the truth they were desperate to avoid. The truth of who they are beneath the excuses, beneath the charm, beneath the manufactured innocence. And narcissists destroy mirrors that show them the truth. They don't want to see their own cruelty, their own entitlement, their own emotional cowardice, their own refusal to take responsibility. So they chose the easier path, attack the mirror, shatter the reflection, blame the person who finally stopped bleeding for them. They needed you to be the villain so they could stay the victim. Because if you weren't the problem, they'd have to face the possibility that they were. And that's the one thing their ego will never allow. Here's the shift you were never meant to notice. You weren't rejected because you were wrong. You were rejected because you healed. You were judged for becoming healthier in an environment that depended on your wounded version. The more you grew, the more threatened they became. Not because you harmed them, but because your growth revealed the truth they refused to see in themselves. You were punished for evolving. Every step you took toward clarity was twisted into an accusation. Every boundary you set was interpreted as hostility. Every moment of self-respect was treated like rebellion. They didn't see your healing as progress. They saw it as an attack. Because in their world, your self-improvement equates to their loss of power. Your change disrupted the contract, the silent agreement that you would stay small so they could stay comfortable. But you weren't misbehaving. You were outgrowing. And the moment you outgrow a system, the system tries to shrink you back down. You didn't suddenly become cold or distant or different. You simply stopped betraying yourself to keep others warm. And that shift, that quiet act of self-honoring, felt like betrayal to people who relied on your self-abandonment. People who depend on your silence will always fear your voice. Not because it's loud, but because it's true. Your voice exposes the dynamics they built their security on. Your honesty disrupts the stories they told themselves about you. Your boundaries reveal the entitlement they refuse to acknowledge. When you told them what hurt you, they didn't hear pain, they heard defiance. When you expressed your needs, they didn't hear vulnerability. They heard disobedience. When you pulled back to protect yourself, they didn't see self-preservation. They saw disrespect. Your boundaries expose their entitlement in a way that feels unbearable to people who believe they are owed your compliance. And your absence? That's the part they can't tolerate, because your absence exposes their dependency, Suddenly they feel the weight you used to carry for them. Suddenly they must face the emotions you used to absorb. Suddenly they must deal with the consequences you used to prevent. You didn't become the villain. They needed you to be. They needed a reason to avoid looking inward. They needed a story that made them the injured party. They needed a narrative where your healing was an offense and their entitlement was justified. So they chose the simplest route. Blame the one who grew. You changed the script. They refused to adapt. And instead of admitting that, they rewrote you as the problem. Not because you were dangerous, but because you were done being controlled. Here's the moment everything changes. When you stop absorbing abuse, the entire system collapses. Not because you broke anything, but because you stopped functioning as the silent shock absorber that kept everyone else from feeling the consequences of their own behavior. You were the buffer that made dysfunction livable. You cushioned the blows. You cleaned the emotional messes. You smoothed the conflicts before they ever reached the people who caused them. And when you stopped doing that, the truth finally surfaced. And they couldn't handle it. When you stop playing the caretaker, people panic, not out of concern for you, but out of fear that they will now have to carry the weight they've always placed on your shoulders. They're not worried about losing you. They're worried about losing the version of you that made their life easy, the compliant one, the forgiving one, the endlessly patient one, the one who never said no, the one who tolerated everything and asked for nothing. That version of you was their advantage. Your awakening is their loss. Because the moment you choose yourself, you threaten the entire hierarchy they built around your self-sacrifice. Suddenly you're no longer predictable, no longer pliable, no longer moldable into whatever shape they needed you to be. You become unpredictable because you're no longer controlled. They can't anticipate your reactions. They can't manipulate your guilt. They can't rely on your silence as a cushion for their bad behavior. You break the pattern just by breathing differently. And nothing terrifies controlling people like losing their grip on someone they thought would never leave. You stop being the emotional dumping ground they used whenever life became inconvenient. You stop being the one they offload guilt onto. You stop being the one who takes the blame just to keep the peace. For the first time, you become a person instead of a resource. A person with needs. A person with boundaries. A person with self-respect. A person with a voice they can no longer mute with guilt or manipulation. And that ruins the entire dynamic. Because now, if they want your presence, they must offer respect. If they want your time, they must offer reciprocity. If they want your trust, they must offer honesty. Things they were never required to give when you were in survival mode. This is when they fear you. Not because you're cruel, not because you've changed into someone unrecognizable, but because you've become someone they can no longer use. You're no longer accessible on demand. You're no longer emotionally available for their convenience. You're no longer willing to betray yourself to keep them comfortable. Your transformation threatens their illusion. Your boundaries threaten their entitlement. Your clarity threatens their control. And your self-respect feels like an earthquake in a house built on your silence. Here's the truth you were never meant to realize. You're not the villain. You're the one who woke up. You're the one who finally saw the pattern for what it was. The one who recognized that love shouldn't feel like walking on glass. The one who understood that loyalty without respect is just another form of self-destruction. You didn't break the system. You simply stopped letting it break you. And healing, real healing, will always make you unrecognizable to those who thrived on your pain, because the version of you they depended on was built from wounds you never deserved. The quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who swallowed every hurt and smiled anyway, the one who apologized first even when you weren't wrong, the one who carried guilt that didn't belong to you. Your healing rewrites that character. It turns whispering into boundaries. It turns self-doubt into self-recognition. It turns survival mode into self-respect. And self-respect looks like rebellion to the people who benefited from your self-abandonment. Of course they think you've changed. You stopped shrinking to make them look bigger. You stopped erasing yourself so they could feel whole. You stopped being the version of you that made their life easier at the cost of your own. You are becoming someone who no longer negotiates for love. The kind of person who doesn't barter their worth for crumbs of affection. The kind of person who doesn't contort themselves just to be tolerated. The kind of person who doesn't apologize for existing. You are no longer willing to earn your place in rooms you were never respected in. And that shift, that quiet, grounded shift, terrifies people who only loved you when you were easy to control. You are becoming someone who no longer bleeds to keep others warm. You're learning that helping isn't the same as being used, that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting yourself, that being the bigger person is often just emotional code for abandoning your own boundaries. You no longer mistake self-sacrifice for strength. Your strength now comes from something deeper. The decision to stop breaking yourself for people who would never rebuild you. And for the first time in your life, you are becoming someone who finally chooses peace over approval. You're choosing silence over chaos, distance over dysfunction, truth over comfort, self-respect over familiar suffering. You're choosing a life where calm isn't earned through exhaustion, but through alignment, where love isn't conditional, where connection isn't transactional, where you are no longer responsible for anyone's healing but your own. This is the becoming, the quiet rise of someone who has walked through fire and decided they're done burning. You're not losing yourself. You're returning to the version of you that was buried beneath the expectations, the guilt, the manipulation, and the roles you never chose. You're not becoming harder. You're becoming whole. You're not becoming cold. You're becoming clear. You're not becoming selfish. You're becoming sovereign. This is your evolution. This is your awakening. This is the moment your life begins to align with who you truly are, not who you were trained to be. So if they called you selfish for finally choosing yourself, if they painted you as disloyal for walking away from dysfunction, if they turned your healing into a crime against the family story, here's the truth they never wanted you to see. You didn't betray them. You stopped betraying yourself. And the people who relied on your silence will always rewrite your awakening as an attack. Because when you rise, their control crumbles. When you see clearly, their narrative cracks. When you choose yourself, their version of you dies. And now, before the mind tries to shrink this truth back down, I want to hear from you. What was the moment you realized they only loved the version of you they could control? Share it in the comments. Someone who feels alone needs to read it.